Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 7 and first session of the day, that is session 13 in the series. Today we are going to talk about a couple of very important and very interesting things. In the first session, we will talk about taking user inputs. So far, what we have done is created page content, which is where we are writing things. That means we are only showing content that is known to us, and we are not accepting anything from the end user. Okay. Today, we are going to learn about some HTML tags or elements, which helps us take users' input. That is very difficult part though, but we will not get into the difficulties immediately. We will just know what are the ways, what are the widgets or elements that are available to take users' inputs. Okay. And in the second part of the day, we will learn about handling the user inputs or taking the user inputs on the client side itself. That means in the browser, and do something with it. We will actually try to build an application where user inputs are taken, and then it is it's the data, right? So data is taken and then it is made part of the page dynamically. So on one part of the page, you will get the input and that will show up on the other part of the page. And that will make the page extremely dynamic. And to do this, we need to know JavaScript in a little bit more detail. So today we will deep dive into JavaScript and learn the basics of JavaScript formally. Yesterday I introduced you, I gave you a glimpse of JavaScript, but did not talk much about the features of JavaScript. So today we are going to do that in the second session. And as I said, we will be doing that by developing an application. So I will introduce you to the application, and then we will see how everything that we are going to learn today, tomorrow, etc., will be useful in building an application like this. Okay, so let's get started with first session today. And what we are going to do here is where is my mouse? It's getting lost. Yeah. So we are going to do what? We are going to get users' inputs. Right. So straight away, starting with an element, a tag, which is called form. HTML gives you a element called form, which is primarily a container of user inputs. So many a times you may just not take one input, but many inputs together, and then you won't want to take that together, send it to a backend server where the inputs will be processed, and then some output will be created. That's the usual flow. When users provide inputs on the screen, and then that data travels to the backend. Sometimes it is stored in the database, or sometimes it is compared with some logic, some other data, and then output is created. A very common case is login. When you provide your username and password, that information goes to the server, and it is compared with already known username and password combination. And then after successful comparison, you get the page that you wanted. Or if by any chance it fails to match, then you are sent a message saying it did not match, try it again or do something. Correct? So that's a very common use case and a pattern. So form is used to collect all the user information, put it in a bundle and send it to the server. Today, because we are not knowing how it has to be processed on the server, because we don't have any server, or we have not really talked about implementing a server side, we are not going to use that capability of form. So we may not even use form. Form is an optional thing, but that's the best way of placing all input sections or fields together as a bundle and then submit the form completely together. Okay. So what we are going to learn today is about something called form elements, because form elements are more important for us than the form element itself. The content of the form elements are important, and the input elements, which are variety of input elements basically, and the input elements could be a simple text field, like you type in something, which is like a username field or password field. Okay, so password is another type where what you type is not visible to even you. Okay, it is all dot dot or star or circle. Then you may be familiar with checkboxes where you tick it. Okay, yes or no. Then you have radio buttons when you have choices and you select one of those, one of the many. Then you have submit buttons and select boxes and text areas where you enter multiple multi-line inputs. Text fields are single line input, text areas are multi-line inputs, right? So these are the things which is helpful in making a form. And form, as you know now, that it is a collection of user inputs which is packed together and sent to some resource, generally on the server side. Okay, so let's talk about another tag, which is the most prevalent and most common tag that will be used inside form. Okay, and that is input tag. So input tag is the most important form element. It is displayed in several ways. So the tag name is same, but it has different visualizations depending on the value of an attribute called type. So you say input, tag is input, and then when you say type is checkbox, it will show up differently. When you say it is radio button, it will show up differently. So let's start visualizing them. So I will begin with, as usual, code. So let me start the code writing thing, and we will see how it appears. So I'm going to write code like simply an input box. Okay, I don't need a form. However, as a good practice, I should always put all the form things or form elements inside a form tag. Not required, not necessary, but as a good practice, we will continue to do that. So let me create an example, ex7.1.html. Fine. So I will now do what? I will browse the page, and you see what is coming up. Pretty simple text box, and I can type in here, right? Okay, let me create a line break, and then I start using some other types, and the other type could be, say, when I did not specify type, it automatically picked up the text type. Okay, so the second one is password. So this one is where I am able to type something and I can see it, but this is the password field where I am not able to see anything that I typed. Okay, and this is how it changes. So there are many such types. So let's take a look at various types that are possible. It's a big list. We may not be needing all of them, but some of the important ones and most frequently used ones are text, which is the default, radio, which is going to give you a radio button. And how will it happen? So let me bring it again, and I will say input type radio. Now what you will see is interesting. The radio will just put up a push button not push button, but a circle like this, a dot, and where I can click and it will appear like this. Once I click, it appears like this. And now I can't uncheck this unless until I have another radio in the same form, okay, in the same form, but there is a problem. I can do this together. So there will be something more to make radio buttons mutually exclusive. We'll talk about that in a while. Okay, so radio is something like this. Then you can have checkbox. And how will I use checkbox? It appears like this square box, and when I click on this, it will have a tick. When I click on this again, the tick will disappear. But that was not the case with the circled radio button. Okay, radio button will be in a group and it has to be mutually exclusive. So we have seen so far 4 types. Okay, let's come back and look at more of them. So radio, password, text, then checkbox. These are things that we have used. It's in alphabetical order, so I'm going to find the most important ones from here. Then we can use date, number, and button, and submit. Input type submit is quite commonly used. And then there are many. So all of them are for specific purpose. Radio input type submit and input type input type reset are also used quite a lot. Okay, so we will be using some or the other type depending on what we want. Let's use input type color. So if I say color, how does it appear? So it comes like a button with the background. This, and when I click on it, it gives me this color dialog, and I can choose the color. Okay, and I choose a green color, for example. What will happen? It basically did not change the appearance, but the value that I have typed in or selected will get into another property called value. Okay. So it will automatically get into a property called value. Suppose I set this value to red. Will it make any difference? Basically, no, because it expects the values to be in RGB color. So for color, type of input, value has to be in certain way. Anyway, so input type is the most common input tag with the specific type makes it appear in different way, and that's the most common input element or form element that we are going to use. For our purpose, we may not be using all of them. We will focus mostly on the important ones or most commonly used ones, like I said, text, password, radio, checkbox, submit, reset, button. These are the things, and maybe color, etc. Or sometimes we may use date and date time, local, etc. So it depends on the situation. We will use or choose appropriate input type. All right. So that is the most common form element that we are going to use in our situations where we need to take users input. Next is select. So most of the inputs are available or possible through input, but there is another situation where we need something differently, and that is selecting from a list. The tag for that is select. Tag for that is select, and then how do we write it? Something like this. Select, and then select will have multiple option tags, and each option tag will show up as an option, and the default representation or visualization of select element is a drop down list. You are familiar most likely with that, but let's create one. See, if I say select, and it has to have a closing tag because it is going to contain a lot of options. Okay, an option will also have a closing tag because option will have a use a text. Okay, let me copy the example from here. So I say Volvo. Now I see the appearance. It appears like this. Okay, it's a combo box when input box with a small icon, arrow, downward arrow, and when I click on that or on the body anywhere, it shows up the list of options that are available. Now if I add more, say I do Tata and I do Mahindra, these will show up as options, multiple options now. And by default, the first one is selected. Now I want to select, say by default, I want Tata to be selected. So I can set a property called selected on Tata, and then that will be selected by default. Though it is the second option, that will get selected by default. And this is what we are going to use quite often. Okay, so select is the choice. Select gives you choices. Fine. So to define a pre-selected option, add the selected attribute to the option. Okay. Now, this is where we are seeing only one option at a time, which is the selected option. Now, if I want to show it as a list box and not as a drop down like current, I will have to use a property called size, and size by default is 1, and that is where it is showing up as like a drop down list. But if I give anything more than 1, which has to be an integer, of course, because it has to match with the number of elements that I want to make it visible. Say I say size equal to 3. What will happen? Let's see. It appears like a text box, as a list box now, not as a combo box. It's a list box visualization. So multiple values are showing up together, and instead of a drop down arrow button, it is showing up a scroll bar. So if I have more and more options, say I add Maruti and I add say Honda and what? Say XYZ. Okay, it's not relevant. Okay, so now I have multiple values, but only 3 will remain visible. For others, I will have to scroll, and then I can choose anything else, right? So the output or the visualization is different, but when a selection is happening, it's really the same. So one of the options remains selected. Now in multi-choice list or multi-select, I can enable multiple selection as well. And how do I do that? Suppose I want to say select Volvo as well as Mahindra. Okay, so how can I do that? The attribute for that is multiple, simply. So if I specify property multiple, then it will allow me to choose multiple values also. But to choose multiple values, I will have to do what? I will have to press Control and then click on the second option and maybe on the third option also. So now we have 3 options selected. So if I just click on one, others will disappear. If I click another, the first selection will disappear. So if I have to do multiple select, I have to press Control button on Windows keyboard and also then press the second or third option, right? And to uncheck, I have to press again and say like this. So now I have Tata, Mahindra, and XYZ selected. So this is quite useful. And it's, remember, this is just a visualization difference between single select and multiple select. So to have multiple select, you have to show the items as a list box and not simply as a combo box. Okay. So drop down box is also called combo box, and drop down list is suitable for single selection, while multi list or list option is suitable for multiple selection. Again, it depends on the use case that we have for getting a particular user's input, and we will choose the element appropriately. Okay. The next one is to provide a long text input. As we noticed in the input box, you can enter everything in one line. You can't enter the next line character or line break character. But if you want to do that, the option for you is text area. So in text area, as you can make a guess, it's a new HTML element. You can enter multi-line input. Now, how many rows and how many columns you want in the visible portion of text area, you can specify by setting some value to rows and cols attributes of the text area. And you can see how it is done in the given example, right? That is how you show up. Okay, so let me just again put it in the example and we'll see. Let me put it at the top this time. Text area. Okay, and I have to do what? I have to put up a closer tag also for this. I'm just putting a break so that it is easily distinguishable, and this appears like this. By default, I can have 2 rows and some about 40 columns. Each browser has its own default values for rows and columns. So I say 40 rows, 40 rows will be just too much, right? It will take the entire page. So I say 10, and cols maybe 40 because there are more columns available. Okay, so let's see now how the appearance changes. Fine. So now this is much larger and I can type anything and everything. Now you see something that has come by default here. This is happening because of the spaces that are available by default between the opening and closing time. I remove all space and then I refresh. It has nothing. So this content in the middle of the text area will show up in the text area by default. Say I write, this is a text area where I can enter multi-line text. Fine. So it will appear in this content. Okay, but you see the spaces, etc., etc. So it takes everything immediately after the opening tags and then starts putting things there. So this is where we have to be very careful in putting the default value. And now it appears differently. Fine. And if I put it on multiple lines, will it appear on multiple lines? Yes, it should. Let's verify. Correct. So it appears like this. So we can put any multi-line input, or we can receive any multi-line input using the text area. And another one which is available as inputs or input tag with type button, we can also create a button by using the button tag itself. Okay, so input type button and button both works the same way. Okay, so we can use button tag, and type button is not necessary. It is the default, but if I have to have a different type, say in button of type image or something, we can specify different values which are possible, of course, and then the content of the button will be the label that I want to use there. Okay, so button is also quite useful in the page. Now button is not necessarily to be part of the form, and button will not be actually recognized as a part of the form. If you have to submit a form, you should be using input with type submit. Input type button or button tag will not submit the form automatically. However, you have a way to submit the form programmatically on any action. So you are not limited by using input type submit. You can submit the form in programmatic way too. All right, so we will see that in a while. Once we start using these elements in our application, we will see them. So that is pretty much on the inputs. So we are going to use them. One thing that we will use quite often is the other properties. So input type password, input type radio, all of them actually requires a property called name. And name has to be unique, and that is the property that is respected by form. When we use the form, and form will have property called action, that will be basically the URL where the form has to go or the form data has to be submitted. That is a server side resource generally where the form data will be passed. And how will it get the data? By the names associated with various input elements. And if some input element does not have a name, then it stops to work for the form. That means that data will not be passed along when the form is submitted, or on the server side, those inputs data will not be available. So let's take this. And now I have this radio button, and if I give the second radio button also the same name, and now I see the appearance. And I click on the first one, and then I click on the second one, you see this mutually exclusive behavior coming, right? Earlier, it was not happening. Now, when I have added name, let me add some value here. That is not something that I'm interested in. So, okay, let me remove this for the time being. What I wanted is make a couple of radio buttons mutually exclusive. And if I have another radio button and I give it a different name, then this is unique. This is different from these two. So these three are not forming the group, but the first two are forming the group. The third one is unique. Or maybe I will add another one with the pair. So you can see that